So, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Global Iftar 2021, brought to you by Ramadan Tent Project. Global Iftar is the world's largest virtual iftar, beginning from London, following the sun across to the globe, to the US, Australia, India, Qatar, South Africa, Turkey, and then back to London. Again, thank you for joining us for our final session of the Global Iftar 2021, the London session. My name is Huda and I'll be your host this evening. So we have an exciting event planned this evening with our speaker, Medani Yunus from Shed. But before we start, first, I'd like to thank our media partner this year, Islam Channel, and give a special welcome to those joining us from Islam Channel's Facebook and YouTube. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. I also wanted to thank Arts Council UK, whose help has allowed us to continue our work this Ramadan, all of which is available on our website. Our work this Ramadan is supported by Islamic Relief, our charity partner, and you can check out their incredible work at iruk.co/RTP. So, our events are usually interactive, so we encourage everybody to hop onto the Zoom meeting. And for those who feel comfortable, just turn on your camera so we can see you and interact with you better. A quick run on the tech. At the bottom of your screen or the More section, your mobile phone, you have the reaction option, so you can show us how you feel in real time. You can also raise your hand if you want to contribute to the discussion or ask any questions, and one of our team will unmute you. Also, if you use the chat, we can also check the chat. But first things first. I just want to know more about how your Ramadan's going. So, Hawazin, I usually pick on you. How are you since the morning? What's changed?
And guess what? I've done my sauce just right now for pasta. This is in. Alhamdulillah, I'm gonna eat pasta again. Oh my god. Yeah, so I'm volunteering in the same time cooking. So yeah, like, oh my god. But alhamdulillah, it's going okay. Yes, and for tonight it's gonna be pasta. Typically, is with the sauce, chicken sauce. Actually, I try to bring meat. I don't eat that much meat, to be honest. I eat more vegetable compared to meat. But yeah, I try to find a balance and to eat fruits as well, like grapes, strawberries, kind of things during suhoor as well. Before I was trying to do, I eat as well oat. What's the name again? Porridge. Sorry, gluten-free porridge. Precision is different with coconut.
So, what's the difference between gluten? Is there a difference in taste between gluten-free and non-gluten-free?
So the thing is,
excuse my ignorance.
I didn't know before, so I am typically I'm getting sick with the normal one. I didn't know, but yeah. So that's why I'm like, oh, I cannot eat any porridge. This is so sad. And actually, one of my colleagues have told me about this, and he was eating at work porridge, and I was like, oh my god, this is so healthy. I wish I could eat that. And he would say, like, there is the gluten-free one. Maybe you should try it. I've tried it, and it was okay. So now you changed my word.
And now you can eat all of the porridge in the world you want.
With coconut. Yes.
With coconut. Where is everybody joining us tonight? Also, how have you been since the Global Iftar? Because you've been in most of the sessions.
Well, kind of, yeah. I'm one of the social media officers, so it's important to be there, to have the quotes, and to push it on Twitter, Instagram. We have a team and we help one another. So it's been busy. It's a busy day, yeah, to have this event to be done. But it was beautiful because we met so many different people from different countries: Istanbul, South Africa. We went to Perth as well in Australia, like different places all over the place. America with Detroit, I think Detroit.
Yeah, Detroit and New York.
Yeah, this one. I think you were there. I don't remember.
Yeah, I did Detroit, New York, and Perth. Yeah. But I think the others I've heard, the guest speakers are pretty amazing too. Sarah, you're joining us from Istanbul. What time is it right now, Istanbul?
It is 2 hours ahead of the UK, so 9:30 for me, PM. And the weather is incredible. Wow,
what kind of weather are we talking about?
It's starting to get quite warm now, so it's very nostalgic, reminiscent of like summers every year I get very nostalgic around this time of year, because it's just like warm breeze at night, gorgeous. But we're under complete lockdown, so it's not like I can do anything with it. So.
Yeah, it's a shame. I think that's like the story of 2021 and 2020.
Yeah, the last year and a half, 2 years. Yeah. That's what it's going to be like. But alhamdulillah, the global iftar has definitely been a highlight for me. It's been incredible to meet so many speakers from all across the world who can engage with RTP and engage with our audiences. And so many people have been watching from all over the world, tuning in on Islam channel, tuning in elsewhere. And it's been a real pleasure, really, to be part of this. And I'm not a volunteer-ish, but honestly, the volunteers have been absolutely incredible. And I do want to put that out there live on everyone, for everyone to hear. The volunteers this year have been absolutely incredible, mashallah. Pulled this off so well, so smoothly. And it's been really, really, really amazing to work with such incredible people. Allahu Barik. So well done, Hoda, Hawaz, and everybody else on the back end who's not currently here.
Yeah, I think the team today were pretty excellent. Yeah, it was a pretty interesting course, but the team were really excellent. They made it possible. So, Mehdi Yunus, how is your Ramadan going so far? What do you have planned for Doug?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, it's going well. I'm currently speaking to you from New York, in Queens specifically. Yeah, alhamdulillah, it's going well. For iftar tonight, it's Sunday, and I'm going to a Trinidadian restaurant. My mother's Trinidadian, so I'm going to try and reminisce and have some food that feels a bit like my mum. So I'll be having what we call in Trinidad doubles. And for everyone who's been to Trinidad, this is like a fried bread with like chana, like chickpeas and potato and all the things you shouldn't be eating when you're about to open your iftar. So that's what I'll be doing this evening.
Sarah said it sounds delicious, and I agree. It makes me hungry.
It's, you know, one of those things you become fixated by, don't you? When you're in the middle of Ramadan, you suddenly start thinking about all those meals you had as a child. And I've had no urge for doubles since January, but somehow during Ramadan I can't think of anything else. So hopefully tonight I can remedy that.
That's amazing. I hope you have like a really good iftar. What time is it in New York?
Well, it's 2:40 in the afternoon, so we're 5 hours behind the UK.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. So I'm just going to introduce our speaker, Mehdi Yunus. You guys have just met him. And today we're going to talk about family and cultural soft power. So Mehdi Yunus is the chief executive producer at Shed New York, a cultural institute that produces and welcomes innovation in art and ideas. He's formerly the artistic director of the South Bank Theatre. And in 2011, he became Bush Theatre's first BME artistic director and was the visionary behind the 4.3 million refurbishment at the Bush Theatre. His work aims to portray a more authentic representation of the immigrant experience. This is reflected on his major works such as Street Rage and The Mill. These works are about Bradford's 2001 riot and the story of Bradford Mill's immigrant workers. So if you can talk to us through tonight's theme of family and cultural soft power and just talk us through more of your work.
Yeah, of course. Look, firstly, just say what an honor it is to be here this evening amongst you all. And it's great to hear some voices from people in London as well. I am missing home desperately in this month of Ramadan. Just to begin, so in this month of Ramadan, a month that for many of us has been a time where we reflect on what a time it's been, a second year in which we are all experiencing a global pandemic together, our second Ramadan together during this difficult period in time. I just want to acknowledge and begin by saying that the last year has raised so many kind of deeply troubling concerns for us as a global community. The questions of inequality, systematic racism, structural inequalities, these have all come to the fore. We can't all but be affected by what we have heard and seen in the last 12 months. For those communities of color that have been disproportionately affected, like all of you have been in our prayers and continue to be in our prayers, it'd be remiss of me not to mention today just how our prayers are with all those who are struggling and in need of medical aid, our brothers and sisters in India and across the world who are suffering at the moment. Like, our prayers go out to all of you. For me, during this month of Ramadan, as well as all of these global concerns, I have been thinking a lot about my own family. I mean, you can't help it, right? For all of us that get to work, have the privilege, as I do, of working in another country, I can't help in this last year, having gone through so much with my own family, have really center them in this month of Ramadan. About this time last year, unfortunately, my father suffered from, my father, who's retired, a postal worker, came to the UK in the 70s as a young man, would end up working for the Royal Mail, that's the postal delivery service in the UK. And about 3 years ago, he would retire. But before he retired, he took it upon himself to build a free hospital in Pakistan, in Hafsabad, which is where my father is from, a very impoverished part of Pakistan where healthcare needs are very under-resourced, sadly. So my father does this great work, and he retired about 3 years ago. And last year, whilst visiting the hospital he helped to fundraise for in Pakistan, my father sadly suffers from 3 strokes whilst in the country. This was obviously devastating news for the family, for all of us in the family and all of his extended friends. For many reasons, I hadn't been to Pakistan in a long time, and I had to go to Pakistan to be with my father, who thankfully would survive his 3 strokes and we would get him back to England. But in that moment, that most vulnerable of moments for my father, I think we as a family came together in a way that we haven't in many years. And we're a very loving, caring, kind of, we value each other. We're a small family in the UK and we're very close to each other. But that shift in my father's health was a real reminder to many of us in our family of just the debt of gratitude that we owe so many of that generation that were really pioneers. I work in an industry of storytelling. That is what I do by day. And often those stories of that immigrant community that came from the colonies, from the motherland, to the motherland rather, those stories are very rarely described as being heroic. Often those stories are a footnote to the history of our great country, but never are those stories really centered and championed for what they are. When I think about my father, when I think about my mother, my father's from Pakistan, my mother from Trinidad, who met in London, when I think of their story is like many others that we all know on this call. I think how far they have come, how much they have had to endure, and what a moment they are now living in as they begin to kind of grow old and kind of enjoy this chapter in their lives. For my family, the last year has really been a moment of resetting our expectations and also recentering some of those values. As a family, we've always valued our faith. We've always valued our friends and our family. But I think this Ramadan and this past year has really forced me to value the idea of spending actual time with my family, not just the idea of holding them in my prayers, not just the idea of reaching out to them every day, but actually what does it mean to be in community with my own family? What does it mean to be making more space for my community, for my family, and not taking them for granted? I'm sure what I say next will probably relate to some of you. I don't assume this to be a generalization. As a young man, I struggled. I had a challenging relationship with my father. I mean, as many young men do as you grow up. But the older I got, the more I began to appreciate just what his legacy is. Over this past year, I've really got to see that legacy. For that generation, for my father's generation, their struggle for so long has been a quiet struggle, a quiet of self-determination, a struggle of sacrifice, a struggle of generosity, and a struggle of remembrance, remembering those around the world. I sit here with so much privilege on my side today, and I think back to my father's journey, my mother's journey in first coming to the UK, and I think there is we stand on the shoulders of such great men and women, but what do I now have to do to carry that on? The only reason I'm in America today is because they gave me permission, not literal permission, but because they were pioneers, because they were not afraid to chase their dreams, because they were not afraid to create a new version of their lives, that I am sat here today in New York trying to kind of create a new chapter in my own life. As I think of this Ramadan, I think deeply about those that we have lost, that my family have sadly lost, that many of us on this Zoom call have lost, either due to natural causes, due to contracting COVID and tragically dying, I've often thought to myself, I'm here in New York, kind of by myself, ostensibly away from my family, but I've never felt more connected to my family in the world. And this is in part because we are so vulnerable in this moment. And so really this first part of my reflection to you all about what this month of Ramadan has done has really forced me to think harder than I ever have about what it means to have family, what it means to have two parents who've achieved so much in their lives, and how do I build on that legacy? I don't think I'll ever in my lifetime, I remember saying this to my father in Pakistan when he was on his sick bed in Pakistan last April. I remember saying to him, I will never be able to achieve what he has achieved in his life. The fact he's been able to build a hospital with very poor education my father had. He came with very poor education from Pakistan to have achieved what he has. There are things that my parents have achieved that I'm going to be hard pushed to ever achieve again. So inshallah, this year I pray deeply for all of our parents, and I pray for my parents that they continue to have a good life, and that I can be a better son, that I can be a better brother to my siblings, and a better nephew to my aunties and uncles and all those in our community. But that was my first reflection to just share that with you today. And Huda, if it's okay, I'd move on to my second point, which is slightly unconnected.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could touch on a few of the points later.
So just to move on, just a unrelated thought. And look, by day, I'm the chief executive producer here in New York City of a cultural building called The Shed. And it would be fair to say, and unsurprising to many of you, that there aren't many people who look like me in my industry. And historically, that's always been the case. I mean, just to use an example of London, like we have so many of our great cultural institutions based in that city, but it's only been in this last decade that we've had a cultural representation that feels like our city leading those buildings. The one thing I've come to really appreciate, and growing up, what I aspired to do didn't really have a cultural value, right? For my parents' generation, huge support from my parents, but the notion of going into like producing theatrical work didn't necessarily carry a currency, a kudos, didn't carry a kind of a sense of importance in the way that they believe jobs are important. But if I've learned one thing over the last sort of 20 years of doing what I do, how governments exercise soft power is no accident. And what do I mean by soft power? When we think for a moment of like cultural, when we think of Olympics, when we think of like national sporting events, when we think about cultural events that take place in countries, look, I'm in a country here in the US that is a country bathed in symbols. Back in the UK, we are bathed in our history. Cultural soft power is not an accident. Cultural soft power helps to define the way in which a nation tells its story back to itself and back to its communities. These stories are often, this narrative, we're seeing this play out, right? So to give you two examples. Here in the US, when President Biden gives his inaugural speech, he talks of white supremacy as a concept, right? He immediately leans into this idea of equity and of inequality. When we look at the UK, we see a government really trying to shut down the idea of like wokeism, the idea that there could be decolonizing our curriculum. These ideas are anathema to our current government in the UK. And by no means am I suggesting that America somehow is better than the UK at this moment. I think both countries are experiencing very deep existential crises. But let's remember this. Soft power is available to all of us. Soft power is how our cultural identity is shaped. If we are not the authors of that narrative, we give control away to politicians. And in my opinion, politicians should not be the arbiters of our cultural reality or the cultural storytelling of our country. So in my role, I really live that as an idea. For me, that's been such an important part of what we do, that our histories have to be shaped by us. Look, I produce fancy bits of theatre. I get to work with amazing artists. But let's not underestimate how governments use soft power. We, as the kind of the voting population of our countries, we can have a say in what our government is doing in our name. And let's not underestimate that when governments are pulling together kind of new deals with other kind of governments in other countries, some of the first things they start signing are memorandums of understanding around soft power, around how we can support each other's cultural ambitions, our education ambitions, our ambitions around employment, etc. In both countries and in many countries around Europe right now, we are seeing countries moving further and further to the right. As Muslims, we see how this is playing out in all quarters of the world right now. I'm not suggesting that our stories are not being heard. I'm suggesting that each of us has a responsibility to keep telling those stories. We live in a moment where there are so many great Muslim men and women working at all strata of society. But for each of us on this call, I really invite you all just to think about, what does soft power mean to you? How are you the recipient of it? And how can you also affect what soft power is doing to the storytelling of Muslim men and women in our country today? Because that narrative for so long, and many of you, like myself, will remember what has happened in the last couple of decades and the repercussions that's had. I mean, I'm here in America. We saw one of the first laws that President Biden revoked was the Muslim ban of the former president, President Trump. I mean, these laws are not an accident. We receive these laws, and we are ultimately the ones that have to live with them. For me as an artist, for me as a producer, as a director, the power of soft power is kind of truly amazing to me. I've had the pleasure of working in countries like Syria. I've been in Palestine. I've been in many other Muslim countries. And when you see how cultural narratives are told, when culture remembers us through its telling of history, it has to remember us in our own voice. No longer can we accept that we are just a footnote to our nation's cultural narrative. For too long, we have been merely the subject of someone else's storytelling for us. And that has to stop. That has to stop. Or otherwise, in generations to come, when they ask what was our impact, it will be someone else telling our story who doesn't look like us. And we see how that is playing out today. I just want to end with this somewhat provocative statement, which is, as people of color, as Muslims, we should no longer be bartering for our equality in the societies in which we're living in. And it still feels today, to me at least, that we're still having to barter for our worth, our cultural histories, to just be acknowledged in our country. We might feel, for each of you listening today, you might feel that actually you have a good life, alhamdulillah, that you have been blessed and that you have a family, that you go to work. But I implore each of you to think about, what is the responsibility we have beyond ourselves? Who are we in service to? How can we be in service to our communities in ways that we didn't think possible? Because if we are not giving ourselves that responsibility, others will take that responsibility on our behalf. And we have seen, and we are watching how that is playing out across the world today. If we as Muslims do not stand up and tell our own story with our own words, those stories will get co-opted and then corrupted, and then be played back to us as if they were our truths, as if they were spoken to us. I mean, this is the trap that stares us in our faces right now. Is, if our stories aren't being told by us and they're being told by politicians, then let's not be surprised when legislation starts to look like we are the victim of what others are offering in the world. And allow me to say this, just to close out with. I'm in such a privileged position today, and I say this to you all, and just to acknowledge this I give thanks for my privilege right now, because I'm in the US. I moved here at beginning of 2020, 10 weeks before the pandemic. I immigrate out here. I have a really well-paid job. I get to work at a very high level in my profession. I have received both of my vaccine jabs out here, and that probably puts me in the 1% of like the world population, on the during 5% of the world population that has had the privilege of having all those things available to me. I leave this month of Ramadan coming out and just really checking my own privilege, really checking where can I make a difference beyond just myself? How can I be in service of communities beyond us? These notions of soft power it's really my way of saying, how can each of us be in service of something greater than ourselves? And how can that service center someone else's concerns beyond just those that affect us on a day-to-day? Thank you all for listening. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. I definitely think that is really good for us to reflect on this year and reflect on all of those people who've lost their lives and have lost a lot of things, unfortunately, because of the pandemic. I also really loved your touching tribute to like the earlier generation, like our parents' generation of immigrants who came here to give us opportunity so we can live a better life. So in terms of what you were talking about, in terms of soft power, how do we as individuals who might not look like we have a lot of power globally or in our countries, how do we take more control of our narratives and we exercise this soft power to tell our stories as minority groups?
I think that's such an excellent question. And I just think and we should just all recognize this amongst us in the UK and the US, across Europe. There are so many today, and we are so blessed, more blessed than we were when I was growing up. There are so many Muslim artists making work across different genre, across like novelists, screenwriters, music producers, etc. Support that work. Support that work. That work shouldn't just be some kind of circus freak show thing that happens over there that's somehow incidental. Center that work. Support those artists in telling those stories, because those stories are your stories. I mean, have no doubt about it. You are the audience that those artists are thinking about when they're writing those books, when they're making those films. You are the audience that are engaged with that. In terms of more practically, as parents, as aunties and uncles, as elders within your communities, I grew up in a very fortunate household. My parents always believed that reading was really important to us. And again, I implore you all, what our young people read, what we as adults read, continues to shape the way we think about the world. Not only the way we think about the world, but the way we think of ourselves inside that world. And so ensuring that we're able to engage in stories and versions of the world that look different and include us, that's a responsibility we can all take. What is not going to happen is there's not a magic wand. We won't change our cultural reality in one move. This is incremental. We're looking at shifts in the way that we perceive of ourselves within a broader cultural framework. So yeah, I implore us all just to think, what are those 2 or 3 practical things that we can do when exercising soft power? Is that about sharing materials? Is that about documenting more? Let's not forget, our archives need more work than they've ever needed before. Like, let us look at the experience of Muslim communities across Europe. Where are those archives currently being kind of stored? Where are those repositories? How can we be the authors of what that looks like?
Thank you for that. Jazakallah khair for that. I definitely feel like growing up in the UK, I didn't actually see a lot of representation as a Black woman, as somebody who's half Middle Eastern. I often saw like either stories of tragedy or like tokenism. And I feel like over the last few years, I've been seeing like honest representation of like women, people of color, people from different groups and different backgrounds. And I definitely think that that's probably changed how I view myself when I read books where I see myself represented truly. And kind of just when I see myself represented in theatre, in movies, and all these medias. How do you think that would shape our community if we saw better representation, more honest representation of ourselves?
Yeah, and I would just say, I think that there is more honest representation out there if we seek to find it. And that notion of like, we hear this in the UK often, this kind of shout out to Nikesh Shukla, the editor of The Good Immigrant, but you have this kind of the notion of the good Muslim, right? This idea that we are inherently good, that actually we're passive, that, do you know what I mean, there's this narrative, right, about what a good Muslim should be within broader society. Let me just say this to all of you, right? Civil disobedience is a complement to any successful democracy, right? We should not be afraid to exercise our rights for our rights within our country. Those stories, those images exist. We have to start seeing this as part of our daily practice. How are we inviting that in? If you were to just watch the news every day, look, my parents, and I love my parents dearly, but constantly have the news on in the background. This is probably a theme for many of us on this call today. But how can we turn the noise down on some of those narratives and turn the noise up on other forgotten narratives? Because even for my parents' generation, they didn't grow up within the UK with a sense of like a country that wants to center who they are, wants to center their politics, their circumstance. That wasn't available to them. That wasn't the gift that was being offered to them. So today, I would say there are many amazing Muslim artists out there making work. I mean, just a couple of names just to share with you. I mean, like, you should check out the work of Hassan Muhammad Ali, a UK-based theatre maker. Please check out the work of Zain Dada. I think is amazing and doing beautiful work. Check out the work of the poet Sabrina Mahfouz, who is doing beautiful work. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, from our spoken word artists to our visual artists to the performers on our stages and screens. We are in a blessed position, not just in the UK, but across Europe and North America. There is a significant number of new works being created that I think are available. We are living in a golden period for this era of storytelling. I think technology has allowed us to break new ground when it comes to the voices and these stories being heard.
Yeah, thank you. We'll try and put the names of those artists in the chat. So if any of you, or on our social media platforms, so if any of our viewers want to see them and look into their work a lot more, they'll have that opportunity. So what do you think is the role of family in kind of like, I think as an immigrant, a child of immigrants, my parents always wanted me to succeed academically in kind of safe fields. What do you think the role of family is in kind of pushing their children towards these fields that allow them to represent themselves and tell their story a lot better?
I think that's such an important question. And I think we talk about families and like for many Muslims families, we have extended families, right? Like our aunties and uncles, our cousins. I mean, when we say the word family, we mean a lot of people. We're not talking about just a nuclear family of two parents and like two kids. I think for my own family, if I can just speak of my own family in this moment in time, I feel that for our family, just saying how we feel towards each other has been really important. I know that sounds so obvious, right? But not just the I love yous, not that I miss yous, but actually of what you have done for my life, of like, actually your example is the example that shaped who I am. Because you were fearless, I have never had fear in me, right? And so being able to name those ideas, because for my parents, they don't see those anymore. They don't see that reaction, and nor should they have to, right? But as my parents, I see it in them. I see the traits that my brother, my sister, and I have within us. And I sometimes think, as a friend said to me last year, who was very comforting to me as I was going through this difficult time with my father and my family, it was just like, how do you appreciate what they leave behind? Like, my father's legacy lives on in all of his children. Do you know what I mean? Like, my mother's legacy will live on in all of her children. And I think being able to name that, I think whilst they are with us, whilst we are able to spend time with them, has been the most important thing I could do. It sounds so simple, right? It sounds so simple just to tell someone how they have affected your life, but it has moved my relationship with both my parents in ways I can't even describe on this call today.
I think that's incredibly beautiful. I definitely think also as a child of immigrants that I can reflect on that. And I feel like my parents having to make this big shift and kind of move to these different countries and then build a whole life kind of makes me feel like I can do anything really and truly. And it kind of changes a lot of children of immigrants' attitudes towards life. Earlier on, you spoke about your privilege. How do we, as individuals who live in the Western world, who have more privilege than many people in the world, use our privilege to kind of promote the voices of other people and kind of serve the global community better?
Yeah, and I think if this past year has done anything for me, it's really forced me to ask that question of how can I be in service of something bigger than myself. As Muslims, we believe in this deeply, but in my practice, how can I achieve that? And I've really made space for that. So a couple of learnings I've had in the past year are that I don't go to my job to live out the fullness of my politics or my spiritual beliefs. That yes, I may share values with the place I work, and I share a lot of values with the place I work, artistic and political, but I don't go to my job because they're aligned entirely with my political views. Like, if I wanted that, I'd be working in a very different industry today. And so what I did last year was I said to myself, how can I be more helpful in this sort of tragic moment of like what we were experiencing here in New York at the height of it? I was out here. It sounds so simple, right? So over the past year, I do Meals on Wheels within the communities here in New York. So that's like a voluntary food service for those elders and those in need within our communities. And a twice a week delivery happens to a lot of communities. It was a very insightful way for me to see New York, to really meet New York in a different way. That was important to me. During last year's elections here in the US, I volunteered in Philadelphia to ensure that voter suppression was reduced by basically being in communities of color and working with individuals to ensure all of their data and all of that information that they would require was up to date and would allow them to cast their ballots in due course. I personally have found that from like doing those kind of like very in the community voluntary works to then going all the way up to kind of helping to support informing kind of policy, be that cultural policy or social policy in some way. How can I be useful at both ends of the spectrum has really been a question for me. And not to underestimate actually that at that other end of the spectrum, or what has felt like the other end of the spectrum for me of what actually I'm within my community, let me tell you all, that has been the most powerful part of the last 13 months for me, is to actually appreciate that the politics that I want to live, the way it truly manifests itself is in my communities, is in the communities I recognize. And what do I mean when I say in my communities? I'm not defining those communities as just being Muslim. I'm defining those communities as being working class communities, people of color, new immigrant communities, those communities. How can my work, my efforts directly inform and better the experiences of those brothers and sisters? And I'm not assuming anymore, as I once did, that just because I work really hard for 10, 12 hours a day in my job, that somehow that is my responsibility to my community. Actually, that's only part of my responsibility to my community. So my lesson from 2020 into 21 during this period of a global pandemic has been, I have to live my politics. I have to live my activism more directly and more squarely in service of my communities. That has been my big learning.
Yeah, thank you for that. I definitely think that embodies the idea that you should be the change you want to see in the world. I definitely also think that there is a lot of value to not just making big change and like making huge political change, but also kind of working within your community to make that small change that can contribute to something wider. And like you said, also having an inclusive definition of what your community is and what that looks like. So to your earlier point, Hawazin has a question. She wants to unmute herself.
Yeah, salam everyone. So I was wondering, concerning, the relationship within the family, do you think after what happened to your father, you become more closer to him? And you think in general that COVID actually kind of is redefining a little bit the relationship that we have with our parents, with our friends, with our family in general? What do you think?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. Without question, the relationship has become closer. I think it's such a powerful question you asked me. It's such a moving question in many ways because my father and I have always had a good relationship, but it's not like there wasn't that emotional proximity that we had. I mean, it was a deeply respectful relationship, but my father wasn't the person I went to when I was struggling or in some sort of emotional turmoil in my life. Rather, I think my father's belief was that he's given us the tools to cope with that. And that's kind of what I would do historically. but absolutely, I mean, you can't, when you see your heroes at their most vulnerable, it changes something in you. They stop being invincible, and they become someone else. And my dad has the right now to be someone else, to be an elder in our community, to be vulnerable, to have his own needs. He doesn't need to be in service of others. And I think that's what this past year has really helped me to understand. Seeing the work that he's done in his hospital, seeing the work he's done with communities in Pakistan, I sort of went, wow, my father's footprint has been much greater than I imagined. And that might have come at the cost of, say, his personal relationships with his own children. But alhamdulillah, by the grace of God, I have been able to mend that relationship, for us to have a deeper relationship, for all of my siblings. And the consequence of my father's sort of tragic strokes has been, we as a family, not just my brother, sister and I, but my uncles, my aunties, all of us have been able to come together. And I feel for my father, this is also a new chapter in his life, that this is a chapter in his life where his illness has also been a catalyst for us coming together. So through the heartache, something really beautiful has emerged for us, and inshallah, hopefully it will remain like that for us, and we'll continue to grow as a family together.
Inshallah, barakallah fika. Thank you. You're speaking so well of your parents. MashaAllah, may Allah bless your parents, and may Allah bless our parents in general, for all the people
Inshallah.
that are listening to us. And MashaAllah, really, thank you very much for your inspirational talk, and the way you see your father. Actually, what I wanted to say is, like, almost like you see him as a hero, whether in the Western side, we always look for heroes outside, like, but sometimes you just take a look on your parents, your grandparents, etc. They're doing an amazing job, and sometimes we're not noticing them enough. We're like, okay, it's the family we are kind of used to, but they're doing an amazing job. And when you're noticing it, you see their values, subhanallah. And it's good to be aware of this amazing value that they have before they leave us, subhanallah. And I hope, inshallah, we're gonna enjoy our parents again, and they have a good health, inshallah. May Allah bless our parents.
Inshallah. I think your point about heroes is so powerful. I've always believed this, like, there were great artists before me that have done what I've done. I don't believe I'm the first. I've just been very privileged and lucky in what I've done, but I absolutely believe what you're saying is right. I mean, when I was a kid, the books I'd read at school, I mean, people who looked like me were never the heroes of those stories. I mean, we have never been in. Every day I go to bed, and I shouldn't say this, but I go to bed every day and I say two things to myself every day, which is, I am the hero of my own story. And when I wake up tomorrow, what is the first thing I'm going to do? Like, I have to remind myself of that, because as a child, you're not told those things. You're not told you are at the center of your life choices. And the second thing I say to myself every night, even to this day, I say to myself, I am surrounded by love, because conceptually that is still so important to me, that as difficult as it is out there, as much as we may struggle in our personal and professional lives, that we should never forget that we're still loved, that we're loved by people who love us for who we are, not because of what we do, not because of the status people think we have or the financial resource that people might assume we have. That real love, that is unconditional. Yeah, I mean, I have to say that to myself every night, that is, I am surrounded by love. And in this month of Ramadan, I mean, those feelings are even more acute than they are any other time.
Barakallah fiqh.
Jazakallah khair. Again, you've said a lot of beautiful things, a lot to think about. One thing is, when I was researching you for tonight, I think I read a lot of your work where you discussed tokenism in your interviews, and how you felt like the industry either tokenized stories that were told about minority groups, and how you wanted to tell a more show a more authentic story. Talk to us a bit more about art, and how it is for somebody that does not look like the standard person, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes a world of sense. I mean, it's my reality every day. I mean, no one gives you permission to do this, right? No one ever gives us permission, whether you're in a line of work like I am or you're a historian. No one gives you permission. Like, you have to take space. And in this profession that I'm in, where space for so long has been denied to people of color, to marginalized men and women, to working class communities, I knew walking into the industry that I'm in that there wasn't going to be this sense of, there's a great legacy that I'm building on. Yes, there have been great artists, but I'm saying there's not a lot of us in this industry, especially not doing what I'm doing. And so I've always felt it was difficult. And also, how does one balance personal values with the values of companies you may work with, when often sometimes those values are slightly counterintuitive to the things I believe in? And that has been my biggest challenge. It's not been my belief in myself as an artist, as a producer, as a director. It's really been in how I navigate the perceptions of others towards me, right? And Ellison, I mean, the notions of double consciousness that I'm sure many of us will know about on this call. I mean, of course, imposter syndrome, however you want to describe it. These are ideas that I continue to be riddled with. And like, I'm at a point in my career where you think, look, Madney, you need to stop feeling so insecure and just start enjoying it. But those feelings don't leave you. That idea of feeling like you're here for a short time and not a long time don't leave you. And I think I've been in a blessed position. I'm within my sector, I've been very vocal in the ideas that I believe in. I've been very vocal in speaking to questions of inequality, to questions of white privilege, to questions of kind of support and resource that should be available to many communities. And the truth is, I can say all those things, but the reason those things are heard is because I also have to deliver the work. I have to deliver those shows, those commissions, that artistic work that really pushes the boundaries. Like, I'm not here trying to win the moral argument. I'm not here trying to convince you of my worth. I'm here trying to win all the arguments. I'm here trying to win the argument of, yes, the moral argument, the value of my art, the people I work with, the economics of what I do. I'm trying to win all the arguments. And I feel that is the only way I've been able to survive, is by saying to myself, there are better things to do in my profession, right? And my profession is characterized by able-bodied, middle-class, white men and women, right? That's what characterizes my profession. If many of you were to think who works in the industry that Madney works in, that's probably the image that would come to mind. I discovered very early on, there are better ways to spend my life than educating privileged white men and women about questions of race. I've got better things to do in my life. That isn't the role I auditioned for, nor the role I want to take. So really, for me, it's about, how do you achieve, what are the boundaries that I want to create in my field in order to ensure that the stories we want to tell, the artists that are out there, are given that permission. And so, yeah, I think it's an extremely difficult field that I'm in. I think it's extremely difficult because there are so few of us. But alhamdulillah, and I say this and I mean this so genuinely, and many of you will have children, those of you young people who are seeking to get into this industry, but alhamdulillah, there are many of us now in this industry, and we all remember what it was like to sleep on the floor of our producer's spare room whilst we were trying to catch our first break, which was my story, right? We all remember what those experiences are. So alhamdulillah, there are many of us, and you should call upon us, because our stories were not unique. These are stories you hear time and time again. And so for any young people watching this, or any young Muslims out there that are interested in this field, I spend my days speaking to people who are curious by what I do and what others like me do. So yeah, please, inshallah, reach out. Like, you are not alone. You are never alone.
Jazakallah khair. That gives us a lot of hope in the future, and the future of like the art world and kind of a lot of industries that are kind of changing. You spoke about the double consciousness, and you spoke about how you constantly felt like you had to navigate the ideas of how people perceive you, and your reality. Do you think that's affected your work, especially your earlier work? And how has it, if that's the case?
I don't believe it affected my earlier work, the idea of how others perceive me. In many ways, if you are to do what we do, what any of us do, and many of us on this call, whatever your chosen profession, right? Just because I work in the form of live entertainment, please don't think that's some sort of heroic act. Like if I was doing a real heroic act, I'd be a frontline worker, right? What I'm doing is a form of live entertainment, is storytelling. There is value in what I do. I've never cared. I've truly never cared what people may think of what I'm about to do. I'm much more interested in what my communities think afterwards. Look, I started my career in Bradford in the north of England. This is an old industrial city in the country. In that city, it wasn't the critics that I worried about. It was seeing the audiences that came to my shows that were members of my community. I had to see them every day. So if I produced a work that wasn't up to par, those communities would let me know. That was personal responsibility I had to the men and women who look like me, who didn't have the privilege I do. I take that so seriously. And for those who are privileged that have an opinion on other artistic work, equally, I say, I hold up what I do against anything that's being made out there right now. And I suppose that is my professional confidence. But my personal confidence is a confidence that I have a responsibility. I have a personal responsibility to all of the communities that I come from, and a belief that those voices and those stories should be heard and seen by the many. And so I take that deeply seriously. And yes, it comes with an emotional impact. Of course, it comes with a sense of there is a cost to what each of us does in the world. Of course there is, but I try and focus in on what the upside is. That actually, what is the impact my choices are making, not just on my communities, but on communities to come in the future.
Thank you. What do you feel like is the impact of writing an honest narrative or telling an honest story?
Oh, I think what the impact is often, and I've heard this, right? And it's often so hard to kind of watch how the generations before me, generations that I look up to, they had to bear such a cost for what happened. And those stories really affected me early on. The idea of being forgotten, the idea of not being remembered in like really important circles, your work no longer having a value, being written out of a cultural history. I've seen what that does to people, and that is real. That is real. Like when you spend 20, 30 years of your life committing yourself to a practice, whatever that is, be you a nurse, a teacher, an artist, when that work is then forgotten, carelessly forgotten, as if you never existed, I've seen what that does to people, and it's not just, and it has definitely affected me. It's definitely affected myself, my regimen of self-care. And yeah, I think just as a Muslim, like that idea of self-care is something that I've always held kind of true to myself. That is something I've always thought about. My faith has given me my courage. My faith has given me my confidence. I mean, without my faith, I don't think I would have had and have achieved as much as I have today. And I think, yeah, my confidence to exist in a world in which people like us have not existed before is directly born from the core values that were instilled in me by my parents.
That's really amazing. Again, thank you for all of that. We're about 3 minutes away from the Azan. Do you have any final thoughts, passing thoughts? And again, we really appreciate all your time and all of your insights.
Look, it's an honor to be here this afternoon with you all, and I'm just in awe of like this moment we're all living in together right now. Like we all met a version of ourselves in the last 12 months that we have not known before, right? We all met a version of ourselves in the last 30 months, and we were like, who is that person staring back at me in the mirror? And you asked yourselves questions about who that person was. I implore each of you to ask yourselves those questions. Do not be afraid to answer those questions, because they will reveal something about yourselves that you haven't known before. And I think that can only be a good thing. We will be reborn after this experience. Like many of us, What is the version of the world we want to live in, and how do we become the architects of that world? And I think all of us on this call and within our broader communities, these are the questions we should be asking ourselves. What have the last 14 months done to you, and what will you change in your life to create a more positive difference in the world, inshallah?
Again, Jazakallah khair. I definitely do think that we need to reflect on, I think in the last year, the world's changed so much, and we do need to reflect on what the world post-COVID is going to look like and how we want to shape it. Again, I'd like to thank our speaker, Medini Yunus, for his engaging speech and inspiring speech. It's given us a lot to think about, and it's been a real pleasure to have you today. I wanted to thank you again, and I also wanted to thank Islam Channel, our media partner this year. Also, I wanted to thank Arts Council UK for making this event possible. You can read more about how we're fighting world hunger with Islamic relief at iruk.co/RTP. Ramadan is the month of charity and giving, so we wanted to encourage you to support Ramadan Tent Project and help us continue our work. Your support is vital to keeping us going as the world transitions to normalcy. By continuing our events like this one, bringing people from all around the world together, but also our open iftar, our sunnah fast, and our other projects, please check out the link in the chat box for more information. Any amount you give is appreciated and beneficial, inshallah. You can donate to us at www.launchgood.com/RTP2021. So we have a few minutes, about a minute left for the adhan, where we can reflect.
اللهم إني لك صمت وبك آمنت وعلى رزقك أفطرت. ذهب الظمأ وابتلت العروق وثبت الأجر إن شاء الله.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته إنك لا تخلف الميعاد.
Jazakallah khair. I'd like to thank our guest speaker, Medini Yunus. I'd also like to thank everybody who's interacted with us. I hope everybody has a great iftar and have a good night. Assalamu alaikum.